Welcome back, everyone. We've got quite the deep dive ahead of us today. You've sent in some super interesting material on, well, cultivating innovation and continuous learning, right? Specifically, Chapter 11.
That's right, Chapter 11, from Cultivating a Culture of Innovation and Continuous Learning.
And we're going to be focusing on how all of this applies to the world of law, especially with generative AI becoming such a hot topic.
It's really a hot topic.
Our goal here is to kind of like distill all this information down, cut through the noise and give you the key takeaways so that you can walk away feeling like, okay, I actually understand what it takes to create a legal environment where innovation and continuous learning thrive, especially when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And just to kind of build on what you've said there, it's important to remember that this isn't just about, having the latest AI tools.
Right.
The chapter really emphasizes that the human element, the mindsets, the culture, the processes, those are the real keys to successful innovation, especially in the legal field. And those are going to be the things that we really dig into today.
That's a great point. And I think it's a perfect segue into kind of, the first big idea that the chapter tackles. And that's that, well, we hear all this buzz about what AI could do in law.
Right.
The reality of getting there might be a bit more complicated. Have you ever wondered why some legal teams seem to just naturally adopt these new technologies,
Yeah.
while others seem to be stuck doing things the way they've always done them, maybe even for decades?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question, and it's one that the source material really jumps right into.
Yeah.
The chapter talks about some pretty common barriers that the legal field faces when trying to innovate.
Exactly. So what are some of those big obstacles that stood out to you as we were going through this chapter?
Well, I think one of the most striking things is that a lot of these barriers are kind of baked into the very nature of the legal profession itself.
Yeah.
One that really comes to mind is this fundamental resistance to change. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Lawyers are trained to be incredibly thorough, to identify risks and to mitigate them, right?
Right.
So it's understandable that that kind of mindset might lead to some hesitancy when it comes to adopting, new ways of working.
It's almost like risk aversion is built into their DNA.
Yeah, exactly.
And to kind of add some hard data to that point, the chapter mentions that a 2023 Altman-Weil survey found that 69% of firms reported partners actively resisting most change efforts.
Wow. 69%.
That's a huge chunk of leadership essentially hitting the brakes on innovation.
It really does highlight how strong that resistance to change can be. And there's this, really interesting example that the chapter gives too. It talks about this mid-sized firm in the Midwest that invested in an AI document review system, right?
Okay.
You would think that would be something that would be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah.
It makes things more efficient.
You'd think.
But the senior partners at this firm, they actually just preferred their old familiar methods. And so they didn't really adopt the AI system, and what ended up happening was they found themselves at a disadvantage compared to their competitors. Competitors who had embraced the technology and were, moving much faster. They actually ended up missing out on some significant clients who were looking for, a more tech-savvy legal team.
Ouch. So it's not just about being comfortable or sticking with what you know. It can actually have a real impact on a firm's bottom line.
Exactly. It can hurt your business.
Now, another barrier that the chapter talks about is this idea of misaligned incentives, and specifically how the billable hour model might actually discourage the adoption of technologies that, save time.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, and it gets to the heart of kind of the way that a lot of law firms, generate their revenue.
Right.
If a lawyer's compensation is directly tied to the number of hours they bill, then anything that helps them do their work faster, like a new AI tool, could be seen as a threat to their income.
Right.
Because, if you do the work faster, you bill fewer hours.
Makes sense. So it's almost like a perverse incentive where being more efficient might actually hurt you financially.
Yeah, exactly.
But the chapter does offer a practice pointer that could help to shift that dynamic. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, the practice pointer suggests that firms should explore alternative fee arrangements. So things like flat fees for certain types of work, or subscription-based legal services,
Yep.
or even value-based billing, where you're paid based on the outcome you achieve for the client, not just the time you spend.
Right.
The idea is to shift the focus away from time and towards value.
So you're not being penalized for being efficient.
Exactly. And when that happens, when the focus is on value, then innovation becomes something that is rewarded. It's no longer seen as a threat.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about changing the way both the firm and the client perceive and value the legal work. Now, the chapter also talks about this idea of lack of tech confidence as a major roadblock. And I think, this is something that a lot of people, regardless of their profession, can probably relate to.
Oh, definitely.
We've all felt that little pang of anxiety when faced with a new piece of technology. How does this play out specifically in the legal field?
Well, the chapter cites a 2023 Wolters Kluwer survey that found only 18.5% of lawyers felt adequately trained in their firm's technology.
Only 18.5%.
Yeah, so that means that a vast majority of lawyers might not feel comfortable with the tech they already have, let alone new AI tools.
Right. And I guess even if you create the most user-friendly AI in the world, if people aren't comfortable with the basics, it's still going to be intimidating.
Exactly. It's like being given a super powerful tool but not knowing how to use it.
Right. And then, of course, there are the data and privacy concerns, which are huge, especially in the legal field.
Yeah, I mean, lawyers have a strict ethical obligation to protect client confidentiality, right? So introducing new technologies, especially AI, which often requires access to large data sets, can raise serious concerns about data security.
Right. You're dealing with incredibly sensitive information.
Yeah.
So any new tech has to be approached with a lot of caution. And finally, the chapter touches on this idea of fear of failure. Which, again, I think is a very human thing. But in a profession where precision and accuracy are so highly valued, it probably takes on a whole new level of, fear.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the chapter actually cites a Deloitte study that found that the fear of reputational damage was a major barrier to technology innovation in law firms.
So it's not just about making a mistake, it's about the potential impact that mistake could have on your reputation and your career.
Right.
Which kind of creates this environment where people are hesitant to experiment or try new things.
Oh.
Now, having laid out all these challenges, the chapter then shifts gears and focuses on why overcoming these barriers is more important now than ever before. Why does embracing innovation matter so much in today's legal landscape?
Well, for starters, client expectations are changing.
Okay.
Today's clients are used to efficiency. They're used to having access to information and services online.
Right.
And they expect that from their lawyers, too.
It's like we expect everything to be seamless and digital now.
Exactly. And if a law firm isn't keeping up with that, they risk losing clients to firms that are.
That makes sense. And the chapter also talks about competitive pressure. Where is this pressure coming from?
Well, we're seeing the rise of what are called alternative legal service providers, or ALSPs.
ALSPs.
These are organizations that often use technology to provide more specialized or cost-effective legal solutions.
Okay.
And then you have legal tech startups that are developing new and innovative tools and platforms.
All right.
And even traditional consulting firms are starting to offer tech-driven legal services.
So the competition is heating up, and it's not just coming from other law firms.
Exactly.
And then the third driver that the chapter highlights is this increasing emphasis on ethical and professional obligations. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. The ABA and other bar associations are starting to really emphasize technology competence as part of a lawyer's ethical duties.
Wow. So it's moving beyond just being a good idea. It's becoming an ethical imperative.
Exactly. The idea is that lawyers have a responsibility to stay up to date with technology and to use it in a way that benefits their clients.
So this is really highlighting that, continuous learning and a willingness to experiment are no longer just optional.
Right.
They're essential to being a responsible and effective lawyer in today's world. Now, to really understand how to build this kind of environment, the chapter takes a deep dive into the psychology of change, right?
Yeah.
And it starts by acknowledging that resistance to change is a natural human response, especially when it comes to technology.
It's not necessarily about people being stubborn or unwilling to adapt. There are often legitimate psychological reasons behind that resistance.
And what are some of the key psychological drivers that the chapter talks about?
Well, there's this fear of competency loss. The idea that if you adopt a new system, it might make your years of experience, less relevant.
Okay.
Or you might not be able to master the new technology as well as you mastered the old ways of doing things.
Right. You've spent years honing your skills, and now suddenly there's this new tool that could, disrupt all of that.
Right. And then there's the disruption of established workflows.
Right.
Lawyers often have these, very efficient routines and processes.
They've got their systems, right?
Exactly. And new technology can really throw a wrench into that.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And then there's also the uncertainty about outcomes.
Hmm.
Will this new technology actually deliver the benefits it promises? Will it make my life easier, or will it just create more work and headaches?
Yeah, that's a big concern. And then finally, there's this concern about professional identity.
Oh.
If a machine can do part of my job, does that make me less valuable as a lawyer?
Right. It kind of goes back to that fear of becoming obsolete, I guess.
Exactly.
And the chapter actually provides a really helpful definition for resistance. It calls it an emotional or cognitive pushback against change, often fueled by uncertainty, anxiety about the unknown, or a perceived threat to established norms.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's important to remember that resistance often comes from a place of fear.
Right. It's not about being anti-technology. It's about feeling threatened or uncertain about the future.
Exactly. And so, with that understanding in mind, the chapter talks about the importance of reframing AI adoption.
Reframing. Okay.
The idea is to shift the narrative around AI. Instead of viewing it as a threat, you can start to see it as a tool that can enhance your capabilities.
Okay, so how do you actually do that? How do you reframe AI in a way that makes it less scary and more appealing?
Well, the chapter gives some great examples. Like, one is to emphasize that AI is about augmentation, not replacement.
Augmentation, not replacement.
Right. It's about using AI to enhance your skills and make you a better lawyer, not about replacing you altogether.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another strategy is to focus on tangible outcomes. Don't just talk about the technology itself, talk about the benefits it can bring.
Right, like saving time, reducing stress, serving more clients, things like that.
Exactly. And then the chapter really stresses the importance of using data-driven evidence to support those claims.
So instead of just saying AI can save you time, you would back that up with actual studies and reports that show lawyers, saving hours per week or generating more revenue.
Right. Make it concrete, make it real.
And that ties in really well with the next concept that the chapter discusses, which is building self-efficacy. What does that mean in this context?
Self-efficacy is basically the belief in your own ability to succeed.
Okay.
So in this case, it's about building your confidence in your ability to use AI effectively.
Right. So if you have high self-efficacy, you're more likely to approach new technologies with a positive attitude and a belief that you can master them.
Exactly. And the chapter gives some practical strategies for building self-efficacy, like providing mastery experiences.
Those three experiences.
So giving lawyers opportunities to start small,
Yeah.
to experiment with AI in low-risk situations, and to experience some early successes.
Okay.
And then there's this idea of offering vicarious experiences.
Okay. What does that mean?
It's about sharing success stories,
Mhm.
you know, showing lawyers examples of their colleagues who have successfully adopted AI and are reaping the benefits.
Right. So you can see that it's possible that other people have done it.
Exactly. And then, of course, it's important to provide positive feedback,
Mm-hmm.
encourage lawyers to try new things, to
Mhm.
experiment, and to praise their efforts, even if they're not perfect at first.
Okay. And the chapter gives a really nice example of this in action. It talks about a small family law firm that piloted an AI document drafting tool.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And what happened was the junior associates, who were probably a bit more comfortable with technology, they started using the tool and had some early successes. And then they shared their experiences with the senior attorneys, which sparked interest and created a demand for training.
That's a great example of how building self-efficacy through mastery and vicarious experiences can really help to overcome that initial resistance.
Exactly. So now that we've explored the psychology of change, the chapter lays out some key strategies to overcome the barriers to innovation. What are some of those overarching approaches that law firms can adopt?
Well, I think one of the most important is top-down leadership and vision. The idea here is that firm leaders need to be actively involved in promoting innovation.
Right. They can't just say, we need to innovate, and then expect everyone else to figure it out on their own.
Exactly. The chapter suggests things like managing partners regularly addressing the firm on the importance of legal tech,
Okay.
or having dedicated chief innovation officers who can coordinate these efforts.
Right. And there's a great scenario in the chapter that illustrates this. It talks about a managing partner who announces a firm-wide tech initiative quarter focused on generative AI.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
They form a committee, they allocate budget for training, they even set up a system to reward successful pilot projects.
That's a great example of how leadership can really make a difference.
Exactly. It's about putting your money where your mouth is, showing that you're serious about innovation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another important strategy is to create a safe-to-experiment culture.
A safe to experiment culture.
Right. It's about making it okay to try new things and to fail without fear of punishment.
Right, because if you're constantly worried about making a mistake, you're less likely to take risks, which is kind of the opposite of innovation, right?
Exactly. And there are a few things that firms can do to foster this kind of environment.
Like what?
Well, the chapter suggests things like hosting internal hackathons or innovation days.
Okay, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it's a way to encourage people to come up with new ideas and to try things out in a low-stakes environment.
I like that.
And another thing is to support pilot projects in low-risk areas.
Okay, so start small, experiment, see what works.
Exactly. And the chapter also gives a really helpful practice pointer on overcoming risk aversion.
Okay, let's hear it.
It suggests that you should start by piloting new technologies in internal projects or in less sensitive cases. Get your feet wet before you jump into the deep end.
That makes sense.
And it also stresses the importance of setting clear goals and metrics for your pilot projects. What are you trying to achieve? How will you measure success?
Right. Don't just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. Have a plan.
Exactly. And then, crucially, document and share the lessons learned, whether the pilot is successful or not.
Okay, so even if it's a failure, you can still extract valuable insights from it.
Exactly.
Now, the chapter then lays out a more structured approach with a framework for change management in legal organizations.
Mm-hmm.
It draws inspiration from Andrew Ng's AI transformation playbook. Can you walk us through some of the key steps in this framework?
Sure. The first step is to overcome skepticism through pilot projects. The idea here is to start small. Choose a specific task that is repetitive, time-consuming, and has measurable outcomes,
Okay.
like document review or basic contract generation.
Right, those are the things that could really benefit from AI automation.
Exactly. And then run a pilot project, show people that AI can actually work and that it can make their lives easier.
Prove it in action.
Exactly. And there's a practice pointer that reinforces this, suggesting document review and basic contract generation as good starting points.
Makes sense.
The next step is to create a dedicated AI team.
Okay.
This is about having a group of people, or even just one person, who is responsible for driving AI adoption within the firm.
Right. Someone who can champion the cause and make sure that things actually get done.
Exactly. This team would be responsible for identifying opportunities for AI, evaluating and selecting tools, providing training and support, and monitoring outcomes. It's about creating that accountability that we talked about earlier.
Right, so it's not just a vague idea that everyone's kind of responsible for. It's someone's specific job.
Exactly. The third step in the framework is to emphasize practical AI training.
Okay.
And the key here is to focus on hands-on experience, not just theory.
So don't just tell people about AI, show them how to use it.
Right. Offer workshops on specific tasks, provide one-on-one coaching, create scenario-based learning exercises.
Make it relevant and applicable to their actual work. The fourth step is to develop an AI strategy aligned with business needs.
Mm-hmm.
This is about thinking bigger picture, right? Not just implementing individual AI tools, but aligning those tools with the overall strategic goals of the firm.
Exactly. You need to ask yourself, what are we trying to achieve as a firm? How can AI help us achieve those goals?
Right. And then allocate resources accordingly.
Right. And the chapter gives a good example of this, talking about a commercial litigation firm that was looking to reduce research time. They set a budget, they train their associates, and they track their progress.
So it's a very deliberate and strategic approach. Now, the chapter also stresses the importance of cross-disciplinary collaboration in AI implementation. Why is that so crucial?
Well, AI implementation isn't just an IT project. It requires input from a variety of stakeholders, from legal practitioners to knowledge managers to data specialists.
Okay, so you need a diverse team with a range of perspectives.
Exactly. And the chapter talks about building effective cross-functional teams, developing collaborative processes, and even engaging external partners. It suggests things like regular innovation meetings, shared digital workspaces, and structured feedback loops. And it even gives a tip for small firms about leveraging resources available at local universities or bar associations.
Oh, that's a good one. And it acknowledges that there can be challenges to collaboration, right? Like differences in language, competing goals, knowledge gaps, things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And it offers some solutions, like creating a shared glossary of terms, ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, aligning goals with departmental KPIs, and offering cross-training opportunities.
Right, so it's not just about throwing people together in a room and expecting magic to happen. You have to be proactive about fostering collaboration. Now, one of the most interesting parts of the chapter is this discussion of a 2025 working paper that explores the idea of generative AI as a cybernetic teammate. Can you tell us a bit more about this concept?
Yeah, this paper is called The Cybernetic Teammate, a field experiment on generative AI reshaping teamwork and expertise. And it was written by Delacqua and some other researchers.
Okay.
And it presents this really interesting idea of AI evolving beyond just a tool to actually becoming a member of the team.
A team member, wow.
Right, a cybernetic teammate. And this idea is based on Norbert Wiener's work in cybernetics, which is basically the study of how systems use feedback to self-regulate and improve their performance.
Okay, so it's not just about AI doing tasks, it's about AI being part of a dynamic, interactive system.
Exactly. And the study focused on how the integration of AI into teams affected three key things:
What were those?
performance, expertise sharing, and social engagement.
Okay, so let's start with performance. What did this study find?
Well, one of the most striking findings was that individuals who were paired with AI could perform at the same level as human teams without AI.
Really? That's impressive.
Yeah. And human teams that were augmented by AI, they showed the biggest gains in solution quality.
So it's not just about replacing humans, it's about humans and AI working together to achieve better results.
Exactly. And the AI also helped to cut task completion times, something like 12 to 16%, and it encouraged deeper exploration of solutions.
Interesting. So it's not just about speed, it's about quality and depth as well.
Right. And then when it comes to expertise sharing, the study found that without AI, there was a tendency for different functional groups, like R&D and commercial teams, to focus on their own specific areas.
Okay.
But with AI, there was a more balanced mix of ideas, suggesting that AI can help to break down those silos.
So AI is acting as kind of a bridge between different areas of expertise.
Exactly. Now, the social engagement piece is really interesting. The study found that both individuals and teams using AI reported more positive emotions and fewer negative emotions.
Really? So working with AI actually made them happier.
It seems that way. And the level of emotional uplift was comparable to what you see in high-functioning human teams.
Wow, that's fascinating. So AI isn't just about efficiency and productivity, it can actually have a positive impact on people's well-being.
Right. And there were some other interesting findings, too, like AI-enabled teams were 3 times more likely to produce top-tier solutions.
Wow.
And AI users reported lower confidence, even though they were getting better outcomes.
That's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the study also found that AI reduced dominance effects, meaning it gave more equal weight to everyone's voice in the team. And structured prompts were really important for getting good results from the AI.
Okay, so prompting the AI in the right way is key. So what are some of the organizational implications of these findings? How might this cybernetic teammate concept reshape how legal organizations are structured and how they function in the future?
Well, for one, it suggests that we might need to rethink how we design work. Individuals augmented by AI might be able to do things that used to require whole teams.
Interesting.
It could also lead to a flattening of hierarchies, as AI can help to democratize knowledge and expertise.
Right, kind of levels the playing field in a way.
Exactly. And it really emphasizes the importance of training, because even limited experience with AI can lead to gains.
Right, so invest in training, make sure people know how to use these tools effectively.
And finally, it points to the potential for AI to actually boost morale and reduce burnout, which is a really exciting prospect.
Definitely. It's about using AI to create a more positive and engaging work environment.
Exactly. And it's important to note how this cybernetic teammate concept connects back to the things we talked about earlier, like reframing AI adoption and cross-disciplinary collaboration.
Right, it's all interconnected.
Yeah. It shows how important it is to see AI as a partner, not a replacement. It highlights the need for structured implementation and training. It supports the benefits of bringing together people with different expertise. And it even suggests that AI can help to create a more emotionally positive work environment.
It really ties everything together nicely. Now, moving on to a more practical aspect, the chapter then talks about measuring success and ROI in AI implementation. Why is this important?
Well, it's one thing to talk about the potential benefits of AI, but you need to be able to actually measure those benefits and demonstrate the return on investment.
Right, because if you can't show that it's working, it's hard to justify the investment.
Exactly. And the chapter stresses the importance of establishing baseline metrics.
Baseline metrics.
So
Okay.
before you even implement any AI tools, you need to collect data on your current performance.
Right, so you have a benchmark to compare against.
Exactly. Things like time spent on tasks, cost per matter, error rates, client satisfaction, attorney satisfaction, revenue per attorney.
Get a clear picture of where you're starting from.
Right. The chapter actually defines baseline here to really drive home how important it is.
Makes sense. And once you have that baseline, what kind of key performance indicators, KPIs, should you be tracking?
Well, the chapter suggests categorizing your KPIs into a few different areas.
Okay.
There are efficiency metrics, like time reduction and increased capacity,
Right.
quality metrics like fewer mistakes and greater consistency,
Mm-hmm.
financial metrics like cost savings, revenue increases, and profit margin improvements,
Okay.
and then innovation metrics, which are about tracking things like new applications of AI and adoption rates.
So it's about getting a holistic view of how AI is impacting the firm. And then, of course, there's the actual calculating return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Well, there are a few different ways. You can look at direct cost savings.
Ah.
So comparing the cost of implementing AI to the reduction in labor costs or expenses related to errors.
Okay.
You can also look at revenue enhancement, so any new business you bring in as a result of AI.
Right. So if you're able to take on more clients or offer new services because of AI, that's revenue enhancement.
Exactly. And then there's this concept of time to value, which is about how quickly you recoup your investment.
Okay, so it's not just about the total ROI, it's also about how fast you get there.
Right. And there's a scenario in the chapter that illustrates this about a firm that invested in an AI e-discovery tool.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
They were able to save a ton of money on document review, which allowed them to take on more cases.
So a win-win.
Exactly. But the chapter also stresses that implementing continuous measurement is crucial.
Continuous measurement.
It's not enough to just measure things once. You need to track your progress over time, make adjustments, and compare your results to industry benchmarks.
Right. It's about constantly evaluating and improving. And the chapter also mentions capturing intangible benefits.
Right, because not everything can be easily quantified.
Yeah.
There are things like an enhanced reputation, improved morale, and risk mitigation.
Right. Those are things that are harder to measure, but still incredibly valuable.
Exactly. And there's a great practice pointer here that encourages firms to tell success stories.
Oh, I like that.
Share real-world examples of how AI has made a positive impact, not just data points.
Right, because stories are more engaging and memorable than numbers.
Exactly. And finally, the chapter wraps up by talking about the importance of embracing lifelong learning in an AI-driven legal landscape.
This seems like a perfect way to end our conversation.
I agree. The world of AI is constantly evolving, and legal professionals need to commit to continuous learning in order to stay ahead of the curve.
Right. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Exactly. The chapter even cites a McKinsey statistic that says 1 in 3 workers may need to fundamentally upgrade their skills by 2030 because of AI.
Wow, that's significant. And there's a practice pointer here that gives some tips for staying current.
Oh, yeah. Things like subscribing to legal tech newsletters, attending webinars, going to conferences.
Stay engaged, stay informed.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that the chapter talks about AI as a catalyst for learning itself.
Okay, how so?
Well, AI tools can actually help us learn. They can offer suggestions, they can analyze data to reveal patterns we might not see ourselves, and they can help us produce higher quality work.
So the tools that are driving change can also help us adapt to that change. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then the chapter talks about cultivating a learning mindset and building learning organizations. It's about fostering a culture where learning is valued and supported at both the individual and the institutional level.
Right. It's about creating an environment where people are encouraged to experiment, to share their knowledge, and to constantly learn and grow.